Tonight, we are going to challenge something you have probably believed for years. We are going to dismantle a lie that has been sold to millions of people searching for their purpose. And in its place, we are going to build something far more honest, far more human, and far more likely to actually help you find what you are looking for. Somewhere tonight, someone is lying awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by a question that has followed humanity since we first became aware of our own existence. What am I supposed to do with my life? What is this all for? Why does finding my purpose feel so impossibly hard? If you have ever felt this way, you are not alone. Recent studies reveal that 58% of young adults feel they lack meaning or purpose in their lives. Nearly 90% of Generation Z and Millennials believe that having a sense of purpose is essential for both job satisfaction and overall well-being. We are living through what some psychologists are calling a meaning crisis, an epidemic of purposelessness that no amount of productivity apps, morning routines, or self-help books seems able to cure. And here is where we must be honest with each other. Many of you have probably encountered a particular diagram in your search for answers. You have seen it in books, in TED Talks, in Instagram posts with calming pastel backgrounds. 4 overlapping circles claiming to reveal the Japanese secret to a long and happy life. They call it Ikigai. They promise that if you can just find the intersection of what you love, what you are good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for, you will unlock the meaning of your existence. Tonight, I am going to tell you something that might surprise you. That diagram is not Japanese. It was not created by ancient wise elders in Okinawa. It does not represent centuries of Eastern wisdom. And more importantly, it cannot give you what it promises because it fundamentally misunderstands what purpose actually is. What follows is not another self-help framework. It is an exploration of the deepest questions human beings have ever asked, guided by philosophers who devoted their entire lives to understanding what it means to exist authentically in a world that constantly tries to tell us who we should be. We will travel from the Heian period of medieval Japan to the concentration camps of World War II. We will walk alongside Kierkegaard through the streets of Copenhagen, sit with Heidegger in his Black Forest cabin, and confront the radical freedom that Sartre insisted we cannot escape. By the end of our journey, you will understand why finding your purpose feels so difficult, and more importantly, you will discover something far more valuable than any diagram could ever provide. You will discover that you have been looking for meaning in all the wrong places. So settle in, let your breathing slow, and allow the steady rhythm of philosophical inquiry to carry you gently forward. The truth has been waiting for you, and tonight we are going to find it together. Let us begin with the lie itself. The word Ikigai does exist in Japanese. That part is true. It is a compound of 2 words, iki, meaning life or being alive, and gai, meaning worth or value. Together they point towards something beautiful and ancient, a sense that your existence has meaning, that there is value in the simple act of being alive. The origin of this concept stretches back to the Heian period, which lasted from 794 to 1185. The word "gei" evolved from kai, which meant shell in Japanese, and here is where the poetry begins. Shells were considered extremely valuable during that era. They were treasures, objects of beauty and worth. When the Japanese people created this word for the value of life, they were not thinking about career optimization or finding the perfect job that balances passion with profit. They were pointing towards something far simpler and far more profound, the idea that your life itself, in all its ordinary moments, is precious. That waking up in the morning to drink tea, to tend a garden, to care for your grandchildren, these things hold inherent value. Clinical psychologist Akihiro Hasegawa published research in 2001 exploring the evolution of this concept. What he found tells a very different story than the one being sold in Western bookstores. Traditional Ikigai in Japan is not about finding the perfect intersection of commercial viability and personal passion. It is about the small joys and personal motivations that keep you moving forward. It is flexible and personal and utterly unconcerned with what the market might pay you to do. So where did that famous Venn diagram come from? The answer is somewhat uncomfortable for those who have built careers promoting it. The diagram was created by a man named Mark Wynne in 2014. He combined an existing purpose diagram with the word Ikigai and published it on a blog. It was not based on Japanese research. It was not derived from studying centenarians in Okinawa. It was a Western creation that borrowed an Eastern word to give itself an air of ancient wisdom. Ken Mogi, a Japanese neuroscientist who has written extensively about authentic Ikigai, has publicly corrected this misunderstanding on his YouTube channel and in his books. He explains that real Ikigai does not happen when all four circles of that diagram are fulfilled. In Japan, a person's Ikigai might be something as simple as their morning cup of coffee, their commitment to a hobby, or the satisfaction of completing a craft. It does not need to pay the bills. It does not need to serve the world. It just needs to make you feel that being alive is worthwhile. The Japanese government itself has weighed in on this question. In 2000, they posted an article on their official website explaining that Ikigai is a broad concept referring to that which brings value and joy to life, from people such as one's children or friends, to activities including work and hobbies. Notice what is absent from this description. There is no mention of market viability. There is no requirement that your Ikigai align with professional success or financial gain. This matters because the Western distortion has real consequences. When we believe that true purpose requires the perfect intersection of passion, skill, societal need, and economic reward, we set an impossibly high bar. Most people cannot achieve this intersection. Most people will never find a paying career that perfectly aligns with their deepest passions while also serving some noble purpose. And so most people, according to this framework, are doomed to live without genuine purpose. But authentic Ikigai is available to everyone. The retired schoolteacher whose Ikigai is her garden. The office worker whose Ikigai is the novel he is writing in the evenings. The parent whose Ikigai is raising their children. The elderly person whose Ikigai is the morning walk to the corner cafe. None of these requires entrepreneurial innovation or career optimization. They simply require attention to what actually makes your life feel worth living. There is research supporting this understanding. Studies in Japan have found that people with a strong sense of Ikigai show lower rates of cardiovascular disease and dementia. But these studies do not measure whether people have found the perfect career. They measure whether people wake up in the morning with something that gives them a sense of purpose, however small or seemingly insignificant that something might be. The islands of Okinawa, often cited in discussions of Ikigai, are home to some of the highest concentrations of centenarians in the world. Researchers studying these long-lived populations have found that their sense of purpose is almost never about professional achievement or financial success. It is about relationships, daily rituals, community involvement, and the simple dignity of having something worth getting out of bed for. Why does this matter? Because when we take a concept meant to help us appreciate the small beauties of daily existence and transform it into another productivity framework, we miss the entire point. We turn something that was supposed to liberate us into yet another source of anxiety. Now you are not just supposed to find a job you can tolerate. You are supposed to find the mathematically perfect intersection of passion, skill, need, and profit. And if you cannot find it, if your Ikigai does not conveniently overlap with a viable career path, you are left feeling like a failure. This is not wisdom. This is capitalism wearing the mask of Eastern philosophy. But the problem goes deeper than one misappropriated concept. We are living in an era where finding authentic meaning has become almost impossibly difficult, not because we lack information, but because we are drowning in it. We are living in what philosophers and cultural critics have called the post-truth era, and understanding this landscape is essential before we can hope to navigate it. The term post-truth first appeared in its modern context in 1992. A Serbian-American playwright named Steve Tessick wrote an article criticizing the American public for what he saw as their willingness to accept obvious lies from their government. He argued that people were consciously choosing to live in a world where truth no longer mattered. The concept resurfaced in 2004 when writer Ralph Keyes published a book called The Post-Truth Era, but it was not until 2016, in the wake of contentious elections and referendums across the Western world, that Oxford Dictionaries declared post-truth its word of the year. What does post-truth actually mean? It describes a situation in society where the boundary between truth and untruth has become blurred, where facts and their related narratives are purposefully manufactured, where emotions carry more weight than evidence, and where the actors in social and political life have seemingly abandoned any commitment to truth, proof, and evidence. Philosopher Lee McIntyre has studied this phenomenon extensively. He argues that the innovation of the post-truth era is not simply that people lie. People have always lied. The innovation is the subordination of facts to personal preconceptions and subjective perspectives. In the post-truth era, some facts are treated as more important than others, and the criterion for preference is not accuracy, but whether the fact agrees with what you already believe. The American philosopher Daniel Dennett, in an interview that has since become famous, warned that humankind is entering a period of epistemological murk and uncertainty, unlike anything we have experienced since the Middle Ages. The real danger, he argued, is not just that people are misinformed. It is that we have collectively lost respect for truth itself. We have lost the desire to understand the world on the basis of facts. You might be wondering what any of this has to do with finding your purpose. The connection is profound and troubling. When truth becomes subjective, when facts become matters of opinion, the very ground on which we might build a meaningful life begins to shift beneath our feet. How can you discover your authentic purpose when authenticity itself has become a commodity to be performed rather than lived? How can you identify what truly matters to you when you are surrounded by curated images of what should matter, algorithmically tailored to capture your attention and shape your desires? The philosopher Nietzsche, writing over a century ago, seemed to anticipate this moment. He declared that God was dead, by which he meant that the shared frameworks of meaning that had organized Western society for millennia were crumbling. Without these frameworks, he warned, we would be cast adrift in a world where there are no facts, only interpretations. Everything becomes perspective. Nothing remains solid. This is not an atheistic statement, though it is often misunderstood as one. Nietzsche was not celebrating the death of religious belief. He was diagnosing a cultural crisis. For centuries, Western civilization had organized itself around certain shared assumptions about meaning, purpose, and value. These assumptions were grounded in religious worldviews that provided answers to fundamental questions. Why are we here? What is right and wrong? What happens when we die? What gives life meaning? When these shared frameworks began to lose their authority, when science undermined certain traditional claims and modernization eroded traditional communities, something profound shifted. The structures that had given life meaning for most people throughout history were weakening. And Nietzsche understood that this would not simply lead to rational secularism as some Enlightenment thinkers had hoped. It would lead to a crisis of meaning, a nihilism that might express itself in various destructive forms. We are living through that crisis now. It manifests as the epidemic of depression and anxiety that afflicts developed nations. It manifests as the addictions to distraction and consumption that characterize contemporary life. It manifests as the political polarization and tribal antagonism that make productive dialogue nearly impossible. People are searching desperately for something to believe in, something to organize their lives around, something to give weight and significance to their existence. But Nietzsche was not simply predicting doom. He was issuing a challenge. If the old certainties are gone, if the traditional sources of meaning have lost their authority, then each of us must take on the immense and terrifying task of creating meaning for ourselves. This is not a comfortable thought. It is far easier to follow a diagram, to fill in 4 circles and discover your purpose like solving a puzzle. But authentic meaning does not work that way. It never has. What Nietzsche called the death of God can be understood as the loss of external guarantees of meaning. There is no cosmic authority that will tell you what you are supposed to do. There is no divine plan that assigns you a specific role. There is no afterlife reward that will compensate for a life of meaninglessness. You are thrown into existence without having asked for it, and you must find your own way. This is what the existentialists inherited from Nietzsche. Not despair, but a challenge. Not nihilism as a final destination, but nihilism as a threshold that must be crossed on the way to authentic existence. The void is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a new kind of responsibility. The post-truth era presents us with an additional challenge that Nietzsche could not have imagined. We live surrounded by what some researchers call filter bubbles or echo chambers, the algorithms that govern our social media feeds, our search results, our news consumption. They do not show us the world as it is. They show us the world as we already believe it to be. They confirm our existing biases. They amplify our preferences. They create, in effect, a personalized reality tunnel where everything we see reinforces what we already think. In these bubbles of shared tastes and opinions, building authentic paths becomes extraordinarily difficult. The mechanisms of confirmation dominate. Facts become reinforced facts, convincing to everyone in the bubble, beyond question. An absolutizing mechanism takes hold that gives weight and reality to patterns of thought that exist independent of any actual assessment of truth. And so we find ourselves in a peculiar position. We have more access to information than any generation in human history, yet we may understand ourselves and our world less clearly than our ancestors did. We have more tools for self-discovery than ever before, yet millions of us feel more lost than ever. We have frameworks and diagrams and apps promising to optimize every aspect of our existence, yet genuine purpose eludes us. This is the landscape in which you are trying to find meaning. This is the terrain you are trying to navigate when you lie awake at night wondering what your life is supposed to be about. Understanding this landscape is the first step toward finding your way through it. But here is the hopeful part. You are not the first person to confront this challenge. Throughout history, there have been thinkers who stared into the void of meaninglessness and refused to look away. They developed philosophies and insights that remain powerful precisely because they were forged in the fire of genuine existential struggle. And the most remarkable among them was a man who discovered his deepest truths not in a comfortable university office, but in the absolute darkness of a Nazi concentration camp. Viktor Frankl was born in Vienna on March 26, 1905, into the heart of what would become the most catastrophic century in human history. He grew up studying the theories of Sigmund Freud and Alfred Adler, the giants of early psychology. He was brilliant, ambitious, and deeply curious about the workings of the human mind. By the time he graduated from the University of Vienna Medical School in 1930, Frankl had already begun to develop his own ideas about what truly motivates human beings. Freud believed it was the pursuit of pleasure. Adler believed it was the will to power. Frankl disagreed with both of them. He became convinced that the primary driving force in human beings was something else entirely. He called it the will to meaning. This was not an abstract academic theory for Frankl. It was an observation that would be tested in the most extreme circumstances imaginable. In 1942, Frankl and his entire family were deported to Nazi concentration camps. His wife was sent to Bergen-Belsen, where she would die. His mother was sent to Auschwitz and was murdered in the gas chambers. His brother died in the mines of Auschwitz. His father died at Theresienstadt. Viktor himself would spend nearly 3 years moving between camps, including Auschwitz and Dachau, watching death become routine, experiencing starvation, disease, and brutality beyond description. What Frankl observed during those years became the foundation of everything he would later teach. He noticed something that defied easy explanation. Some prisoners, despite having every reason to despair, managed to maintain their humanity. They helped others. They found small moments of beauty in impossible circumstances. They held on to hope when hope seemed absurd. Other prisoners, sometimes those who had been physically stronger or better positioned to survive, simply gave up and died. The difference, Frankl came to believe, was meaning. Those who survived, those who managed to retain some spark of their humanity, were those who had found something to live for, a purpose beyond their immediate suffering, a task that still needed to be completed, a person who was waiting for them, a reason to get out of bed even when every cell in their body was screaming to surrender. He wrote about this in his most famous book, published in 1946 under the title Man's Search for Meaning. The book has sold millions of copies and been translated into more than 50 languages. Its central message is deceptively simple. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. This is not naive optimism. Frankl was not suggesting that positive thinking could make concentration camps bearable. He was making a much more profound point. Even in the most extreme conditions of suffering, human beings retain the capacity to decide how they will respond. This freedom cannot be taken away by any external force. It is the irreducible core of human dignity. From this insight, Frankl developed what he called logotherapy, a word derived from the Greek logos, meaning meaning or purpose. Unlike Freud's psychoanalysis, which looked backward into childhood trauma, and unlike the behaviorist approaches that treated humans as simple response mechanisms, logotherapy focused forward. It helped people identify reasons to live, purposes worth pursuing, meanings that could sustain them through suffering. Frankl identified 3 distinct pathways through which human beings can discover meaning in their lives. The first he called creative values. This is meaning that comes from creating something, accomplishing a task, doing work that matters. When you build something, write something, solve a problem, help someone, you participate in a form of meaning-making that has sustained humans since the beginning of our existence. The second pathway he called experiential values. This is meaning that comes from receiving something from the world, from experiencing truth, beauty, or love. When you witness a sunset that takes your breath away, when you are moved by a piece of music, when you feel genuine connection with another human being, you are touching a form of meaning that does not depend on what you produce or accomplish. It depends simply on your capacity to receive and appreciate what is given. The third pathway, and perhaps the most important for understanding how to find meaning in difficult circumstances, Frankl called attitudinal values. This is meaning that comes from the stance we take toward unavoidable suffering. When you face something terrible that you cannot change, when loss and pain and limitation are your reality, you still retain the freedom to decide how you will meet that suffering. You can meet it with bitterness or with grace. You can let it destroy you, or you can let it deepen you. This choice, Frankl insisted, is always available. It is the last freedom that can never be taken away. There is a story Frankl told that illustrates this perfectly. An elderly general practitioner came to see him 2 years after his wife had died. The man was severely depressed, unable to overcome his grief. Frankl asked him a simple question. What would have happened if you had died first and your wife had to survive you? The man thought for a moment and then said, "Oh, for her this would have been terrible. How she would have suffered." Frankl replied, "You see, such suffering has been spared her, and it was you who spared her this suffering. But now you have to pay for it by surviving and mourning her." The old man said nothing. He shook Frankl's hand and left. His suffering had not changed. His wife was still dead. But in that moment, his suffering had been given meaning. He was not merely a victim of loss. He was someone whose continued existence, painful as it was, had spared the person he loved most from experiencing the same pain. This is what Frankl meant when he said that meaning cannot be given but must be discovered. No one could have told that grieving doctor what his suffering meant. He had to find it for himself, with perhaps just a gentle nudge to help him see from a different angle. Frankl also introduced a concept he called new dynamics, the tension that exists between who we are and who we are meant to become. He believed that mental well-being is not about achieving equilibrium, not about eliminating all stress and finding perfect peace. It is about living in the productive tension between a meaning that calls to us and our current position in life. We need something to strive toward, something that pulls us forward, something that makes demands on us. This directly contradicts much of what modern wellness culture tells us. We are often encouraged to reduce stress, find balance, achieve calm. But Frankl observed that people who lack any demanding purpose in their lives often fall into what he called the existential vacuum, a state of emptiness and boredom that can manifest as depression, anxiety, or desperate pursuit of pleasure and distraction. The existential vacuum is perhaps the defining psychological ailment of our time. Look around and you will see its symptoms everywhere. The endless scrolling through social media in search of something, anything, to fill the emptiness. The binge-watching of television series is a way to avoid confronting the question of what to do with one's actual life. The pursuit of material possessions that brings a momentary thrill followed by the need for more. The frantic busyness that allows no space for reflection. These are all symptoms of a profound meaninglessness that has settled over much of modern life. Frankl believed that much of what we call depression is actually what he termed noogenic neurosis, a neurosis originating not from psychological conflict, but from a frustrated will to meaning. The person suffering from this condition does not need therapy in the traditional sense. They need meaning. They need something worth living for, something that makes demands on them, something that calls them beyond their comfort zone into genuine engagement with life. This is why the self-help industry so often fails. It treats the symptoms without addressing the cause. It offers techniques for feeling better when the real need is for something worth feeling about. It promises optimization and efficiency when the real need is for purpose and significance. It addresses the question of how to live more comfortably when the real question is why live at all. Frankl was not opposed to comfort or happiness. He simply recognized that these cannot be pursued directly. They are byproducts of a meaningful life, side effects of genuine engagement with purposes that transcend the self. Chase happiness, and it will elude you. Chase meaning, and happiness will catch up with you without your needing to pursue it. There is a story Frankl told about his experience in the concentration camps that illustrates the life and death stakes of meaning. He observed that prisoners who believed they would be liberated by a certain date tended to die shortly after that date passed without liberation. The disappointment was too great. Their hope had been organized around a specific outcome, and when that outcome failed to materialize, they lost the will to continue. But those who had found a more fundamental kind of meaning, those who were living for something that did not depend on any particular outcome, those who had found purpose in helping others, in maintaining their dignity, in bearing witness to what was happening, these prisoners showed remarkable resilience. They could absorb disappointment after disappointment because their meaning was not contingent on any specific external event. This has profound implications for how we think about our own lives. If our sense of meaning depends entirely on achieving specific goals, if we can only feel that our lives matter when things are going well, we are profoundly vulnerable. But if we can find meaning in the way we face our circumstances, whatever they may be, if we can locate purpose in our attitude and our choices rather than only in our outcomes, we become resilient in a way that no amount of success can provide. Does any of this sound familiar? Does it perhaps describe some of what you have experienced in your own search for meaning? Frankl's insights were not concocted in a philosopher's armchair. They were forged in the furnace of the most extreme human suffering imaginable. And that is precisely why they carry such weight. When a man who has witnessed his entire family murdered, who has been reduced to a number and forced to labor until death, seemed like a mercy, when that man tells you that meaning can be found in any circumstance. His words carry an authority that no self-help guru can match. But Frankl was not alone in grappling with these questions. He stood in a long line of thinkers who had devoted their lives to understanding what it means to exist authentically, to live a life that is genuinely your own rather than one prescribed by society, convention, or fear. These thinkers are known collectively as the existentialists, and their insights form a compass that can guide us through the confusion of our post-truth age. The story of existentialism begins in Denmark in the early 19th century, with a man whose influence far exceeded his recognition during his own lifetime. Søren Kierkegaard, born in Copenhagen in 1813, is often called the father of existentialism, though he never used the term himself. He was a voracious writer whose works tackle some of the deepest questions any human being can ask. Kierkegaard's central insight was a critique of what he called rational detachment, the philosophical tradition before him, stretching back through Descartes and ultimately to the ancient Greeks, had assumed that truth could be discovered through objective reasoning. Stand back from your situation, think clearly, analyze the evidence, and truth will reveal itself. This approach had produced remarkable achievements in science and philosophy, but Kierkegaard argued it was fundamentally inadequate when it came to the questions that matter most. You can analyze the chemical composition of a sunset. You can measure the wavelengths of light and explain precisely why the sky turns orange and red. But this analysis tells you nothing about what it means to stand there breathing in the cool evening air, watching the day come to an end, feeling simultaneously the beauty of the moment and the melancholy of its passing. The objective facts and the lived experience belong to entirely different dimensions of reality. Kierkegaard insisted that when we strip subjectivity from the world, we strip meaning from the world. If we want to find reasons to live, preserving the first-person perspective is essential. The question is not, what is the meaning of life, as though there was some objective answer written somewhere waiting to be discovered. The question is, what is the meaning of life for me? This might seem obvious, but its implications are radical. It means that meaning cannot be handed to you by an authority. It cannot be discovered through purely rational analysis. It requires what Kierkegaard called a leap, a commitment that goes beyond what logic alone can justify. For Kierkegaard himself, this leap was into religious faith, but later existentialists would build on his insight to offer more secular responses. Kierkegaard also described what he called stages on life's way, 3 different modes of existence that represent progressively deeper engagement with authentic living. The first is the aesthetic stage, where a person lives for pleasure, sensation, and novelty. This might seem appealing, but Kierkegaard observed that it inevitably leads to boredom and despair. There are only so many pleasures, and they diminish with repetition. The second is the ethical stage, where a person commits to moral principles and social obligations. This represents progress beyond mere pleasure-seeking, but it too has limits. It can become a form of conformity, following rules without genuine personal engagement. The third stage, the religious stage, represents for Kierkegaard the highest form of existence. Here, the individual stands alone before God, making a commitment that cannot be justified by rational argument or social convention. It is a leap of faith that transforms one's entire orientation to life. You do not need to share Kierkegaard's religious convictions to appreciate his insight. What he was describing is the necessity of passionate commitment, of choosing something and dedicating yourself to it with your whole being. A life without such commitment, no matter how comfortable or successful by external measures, is a life that Kierkegaard described as living in bloodless indolence, unwilling or unable to make a real commitment. Following Kierkegaard, the German philosopher Martin Heidegger developed these ideas in new directions. His masterwork, Being and Time, published in 1927, is one of the most difficult and influential philosophical texts of the 20th century. At its heart is a question that seems almost childishly simple. What does it mean to be? What is the nature of existence itself? Heidegger approached this question through what he called Dasein, a German word meaning being there or existence. He argued that human beings are unique among all entities because we are the ones who question our own existence. We are the beings for whom being is an issue. We do not simply exist like rocks or trees. We exist in such a way that our existence matters to us, and we are constantly concerned with what kind of beings we will become. One of Heidegger's most important contributions was his analysis of what he called inauthentic existence. Most of the time, he observed, we do not live our lives from our own center. We live according to what they say, what everyone does, what is considered normal and acceptable. Heidegger called this mode of existence the they-self. It is a form of existence where we have essentially handed over the direction of our lives to anonymous social forces. Living as the they-self is comfortable. It relieves us of the burden of genuine choice. If everyone does it, if it is what one does, then we do not have to take responsibility for the direction of our lives. But this comfort comes at a terrible price. It is a form of self-estrangement, alienating us from our own authentic possibilities. What breaks us out of this state? Heidegger's answer is disturbing but profound. It is the confrontation with our own mortality. He called this being toward death, when we truly face the fact that we will die, that our time is finite, that the possibilities available to us are not infinite. Something shifts. The opinions of the they, the social conventions that seemed so important, suddenly lose their grip. We are thrown back on ourselves, forced to ask what we really want to do with the brief time we have been given. This is not a morbid preoccupation with death. It is the opposite. It is the recognition that authentic living requires owning our finitude. We cannot live as though we will live forever, drifting along with whatever currents society provides. We must choose, and choose from the recognition that our choices have weight precisely because our time is limited. From this confrontation with mortality emerges what Heidegger called resoluteness, a commitment to living from one's own center, taking up one's own possibilities rather than merely conforming to expectations. An authentic person, in Heidegger's sense, is not someone who rejects all social connection or convention. It is someone who has taken ownership of their life, who has consciously chosen their commitments rather than simply inheriting them. Heidegger used a fascinating term to describe how we usually exist. He called it falling or fallenness. This does not carry the moral connotation that falling might have in religious contexts. It simply describes our tendency to be absorbed in everyday concerns, lost in the they, drifting along with routines and expectations without ever genuinely confronting the question of our own existence. We fall into the world of jobs and relationships and tasks and distractions, and in falling, we lose ourselves. This fallenness is not a mistake we make at some particular moment. It is the default mode of human existence. We are always already fallen, always already absorbed in everyday concerns, always already deflected from genuine self-confrontation. Authentic existence is not a permanent achievement, but a moment of breakthrough that must constantly be renewed against the pull of everydayness. There is something almost haunting about Heidegger's description of how we flee from ourselves. We keep busy, we fill silence with chatter, we avoid solitude, we immerse ourselves in entertainment, we do anything and everything to avoid the confrontation with our own existence that would reveal both our freedom and our finitude. Sound familiar? This was written in 1927, long before smartphones and streaming services, and the infinite scroll. The human capacity for distraction is ancient, Technology has only made it more efficient. What Heidegger offers is not a technique for achieving authenticity, but a diagnosis of why authenticity is so difficult and a reminder of what is at stake. When we live inauthentically, we are not merely making a tactical error that can be corrected by better planning. We are missing the fundamental character of our own existence. We are, in a sense, not fully alive. The third great existentialist we must consider is Jean-Paul Sartre, who became the public face of existentialism in the mid-20th century. Where Heidegger was dense and difficult, often deliberately obscure, Sartre was a public intellectual who engaged directly with the culture of his time. He wrote not only philosophy but novels, plays and essays that made existentialist ideas accessible to a broad audience. Sartre's famous slogan, "Existence precedes essence," captures a radical idea about human nature. For every other thing in the world, essence precedes existence. A knife exists because someone conceived of what a knife should be and then made one. Its purpose, its essence, comes before its actual existence. But for human beings, Sartre argued, the order is reversed. We exist first, thrown into the world without our consent, and only then do we create our essence through our choices and actions. The implications of this idea are staggering. It means there is no pre-given human nature that you must discover. There is no blueprint, no template, no script for your life waiting to be found. The question, "What am I supposed to do?" has no predetermined answer. You are not supposed to do anything. You are free to create your life through your choices. This freedom, Sartre insisted, is not something we can escape. We are condemned to be free. Even refusing to choose is itself a choice. Even surrendering to convention and following the crowd is a choice, specifically the choice to let others decide for you. You cannot avoid responsibility for your existence by pretending that you had no options. You always have options, even if none of them are pleasant, even if all of them involve sacrifice or suffering. Sartre developed the concept of bad faith to describe the ways we try to escape this freedom. For every other thing in the world, essence precedes existence. A knife exists because someone conceived of what a knife should be and then made one. Its purpose, its essence, comes before its actual existence. But for human beings, Sartre argued, the order is reversed. We exist first, thrown into the world without our consent, and only then do we create our essence, through our choices and actions. This means there is no pre-given human nature that determines who you must become. There is no blueprint, no template, no predetermined purpose waiting to be discovered. You are, as Sartre put it, condemned to be free. Condemned because this freedom is not optional. You cannot escape the burden of choosing who you will be. Even refusing to choose is itself a choice. Sartre developed the concept of bad faith to describe the ways we try to escape this freedom. Bad faith is a form of self-deception where we pretend that we have no choice, that circumstances force our hand, that we are merely playing roles that have been assigned to us. The waiter who becomes so absorbed in the rituals of his job that he forgets he is a free human being choosing to perform these actions. The lover who denies responsibility for their feelings by claiming they could not help falling in love. The person who says they had no choice when they actually chose not to resist. All of these are examples of bad faith. Authentic existence, for Sartre, means fully acknowledging our freedom and accepting the anxiety that comes with it. It means recognizing that we are not complete beings with fixed natures, but beings in the making, constantly creating ourselves through our choices. We are, he wrote, no other than a series of undertakings, the sum and organization of the relations that constitute these undertakings. Now you might be thinking that all this sounds rather heavy for a philosophy intended to help you sleep. But there is a gentleness hidden in these rigorous ideas. What the existentialists are ultimately telling us is that the search for meaning is not a problem to be solved, but a life to be lived. They are liberating us from the tyranny of thinking there is one right answer, one perfect diagram, one framework that will finally explain what we are supposed to do with our lives. If existence precedes essence, then the diagrams and frameworks and four-circle Venn diagrams are at best starting points, rough sketches that will never capture the full reality of who you are becoming. Your life is not a puzzle where the pieces already exist and simply need to be assembled correctly. Your life is an ongoing act of creation, and you are both the artist and the artwork. This is where modern psychology has largely failed us. We have been sold the idea that with enough data, enough analysis, enough self-assessment questionnaires, we can finally discover our true selves and optimize our lives accordingly. But the existentialists would say this fundamentally misunderstands the nature of human existence. You do not have a true self hiding somewhere waiting to be discovered through the right personality test. You have possibilities, freedom, and the responsibility to create yourself through your choices. This is both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it means no one can tell you what you are supposed to do. Liberating because it means no one can tell you what you are supposed to do. The weight and the freedom are the same thing. There is something else the existentialists understood that we desperately need to recover today. They understood that anxiety is not the enemy. In our therapeutic culture, we have been taught to view anxiety as a problem to be eliminated, a symptom to be managed, a malfunction in the smooth operation of consciousness. But the existentialists saw it differently. Kierkegaard wrote extensively about what he called angst or dread. For him, anxiety was not merely a psychological state, but an essential feature of human existence. It arises precisely because we are free, because our choices have weight, because the future is genuinely open and we must decide how to move into it. An animal does not feel existential anxiety because an animal does not face genuine choices about how to live. It simply follows its instincts. But human beings stand at crossroads, and the anxiety we feel is the price of our freedom. Heidegger developed this idea further. He distinguished between fear, which always has a specific object, and anxiety, which has no particular object but discloses the nature of existence itself. When we are anxious, the ordinary world in which we are absorbed seems to slip away. The meanings and purposes that usually organize our experience become somehow questionable. We are thrown back on ourselves, confronted with the bare fact of our existence and the question of what to make of it. This sounds unpleasant, and in a sense it is. But Heidegger argued that anxiety serves an essential function. It breaks the spell of everyday absorption. It wakes us from the trance of the day self. It presents us with the possibility of authentic existence. In anxiety, we encounter what Heidegger called the nothing, not a particular absence, but the groundlessness of existence itself. And it is only by facing this groundlessness that we can take genuine responsibility for our lives. The German philosopher Karl Jaspers, who was deeply influenced by both Kierkegaard and Heidegger, spoke of what he called boundary situations, or limit situations. These are moments when everything we thought was solid and secure collapses. The death of someone we love, a serious illness, the failure of a project we had invested everything in, the betrayal by someone we trusted. These moments are terrible, but they are also what Jaspers called occasions for philosophy. They shake us out of our comfortable assumptions and force us to confront fundamental questions about meaning and existence. For most of us, most of the time, we avoid these questions. We stay busy. We distract ourselves. We fill every moment with activity and noise so that we never have to sit with the silence and face what lurks there. But the existentialists suggest that this avoidance comes at a cost. It prevents us from living authentically. It keeps us trapped in what Heidegger called the idle chatter of everyday existence, talking about nothing in particular with no genuine engagement. What if anxiety, rather than being something to eliminate, was actually an invitation? What if those moments of groundlessness were actually opportunities to discover something essential about who we are and who we might become? This is not to romanticize suffering or to suggest that we should seek out pain. It is simply to recognize that the discomfort we often feel in the face of big questions might be pointing towards something important, rather than merely indicating a malfunction. There is a scene in Sartre's novel Nausea that captures this perfectly. The protagonist, Antoine Roquentin, is sitting in a park when he is suddenly overwhelmed by what he can only describe as the sheer existence of things. A tree root becomes unbearably present, almost obscene in its brute facticity. Everything seems absurd, meaningless, contingent. This is not a pleasant experience. Roquentin is deeply disturbed by it. But it is also a breakthrough. He is seeing existence as it actually is, stripped of the comfortable meanings we usually drape over it. And from this raw encounter with existence, something new becomes possible. The existentialists do not promise comfort. They do not offer a soothing framework that will make everything okay. What they offer instead is something more valuable. They offer honesty. They tell us that life is difficult, that meaning is not guaranteed, that we must create ourselves through our choices, that freedom is a burden as well as a gift. But they also tell us that this difficulty is not a problem to be solved. It is the condition of human existence. And by facing it squarely, we become capable of a kind of living that those who flee into distraction and conformity will never know. Let us now turn our attention to a phenomenon that has made authentic existence even more challenging than the existentialists could have imagined. We live in an era where our identities are not just formed through face-to-face interactions with family, friends, and community. They are also formed, perhaps increasingly formed, through our engagement with digital platforms and social media. The psychologist Erik Erikson, writing in the mid-20th century, described identity formation as a lifelong process that moves through distinct stages. During adolescence and young adulthood, we face what he called the identity crisis, a period where we actively explore who we are and who we want to become. This exploration happens through relationships, through trying on different roles, through receiving feedback from others about who they perceive us to be. Now consider what happens when this process occurs primarily through the mediated environment of social media. The sociologist Charles Cooley developed a concept called the looking glass self, the idea that we form our sense of who we are by observing how others react to us. We see ourselves reflected in other people's responses, but on social media this mirror becomes distorted in ways that fundamentally alter the process. On social media, we do not present ourselves as we are. We present curated versions of ourselves, carefully edited highlights designed to project a particular image. We take dozens of photographs and select only the most flattering. We craft our words to maximize likes and engagement. We build what some researchers call a digital identity that may bear little resemblance to our actual lived experience. This curated self then receives feedback, but the feedback is also distorted. It is reduced to likes and comments and shares, quantified forms of approval that tell us very little about genuine human connection. And the algorithms that govern these platforms are designed not to help us understand ourselves, but to keep us engaged, to capture our attention and sell it to advertisers. Researchers found something important about authenticity on social media and mental health. People who perceive themselves as authentic on social media, who feel they are presenting their genuine selves rather than performing a curated version, tend to have fewer mental health symptoms. But here is the paradox. The very nature of social media makes authenticity extraordinarily difficult. The platforms reward performance, reward controversy, reward engagement-optimized content. They do not reward the quiet, complicated, often boring reality of genuine human existence. What results from this is what some researchers call techno-social displacement, a phenomenon where digital interactions replace meaningful face-to-face connections, leading to social isolation and identity fragmentation. We become hyper-connected, constantly in touch with hundreds or thousands of so-called friends, yet emotionally disconnected, lacking the deep relationships that actually sustain human beings. The philosopher Byung-Chul Han has written extensively about what he calls the information society and its effects on our relationship with truth. He argues that the problem today is not so much that people lie, but that society hardly seems to care what is true and what is false anymore. We have become, in his words, a society beyond truth, where the distinction between truth and lies has simply ceased to matter for large portions of the population. Combine this with the filter bubbles we discussed earlier, and you have a recipe for profound disorientation. How can you discover your authentic self when your primary mirror for self-understanding is an algorithmic system designed to keep you scrolling? How can you find your genuine values when you are constantly shown content, selected precisely because it will appeal to values you already seem to hold? How can you make authentic commitments when you are surrounded by performative versions of commitment designed to generate engagement? This is not to say that technology is inherently evil or that social media has no value. It is to say that finding authentic purpose in this environment requires a kind of vigilance that previous generations did not need. It requires actively questioning whether the values you hold are genuinely yours or have been installed by algorithms. It requires asking whether the self you present online has any connection to who you actually are. It requires creating spaces in your life where you can exist without the constant pressure of observation and judgment. The existentialists wrote before social media existed, but their insights are perhaps more relevant now than ever. When Heidegger warned about the they self, about living according to what everyone does rather than from one's own center, he could not have imagined how powerful and pervasive that they would become. The they is now in your pocket. The they follows you everywhere. The they knows what you like and shows you more of it. The they shapes your desires before you even know you have them. Breaking free from this requires what the existentialists called authentic existence. And authentic existence begins with recognizing that you are in a condition of inauthenticity. It begins with the uncomfortable realization that many of the things you think you want, many of the values you think you hold, many of the ways you think about yourself, have been shaped by forces that do not have your genuine flourishing as their goal. Consider the ways in which social media shapes our conception of what a meaningful life looks like. We see images of success, of adventure, of seemingly perfect relationships, of bodies that conform to idealized standards, of homes that look like magazine spreads. These images seep into our consciousness and become the benchmarks against which we measure our own lives. But whose standards are these? They are not the standards of wisdom traditions that have been refined over centuries. They are the standards of an attention economy that profits from our insecurity. The philosopher Guy Debord, writing decades before social media existed, described what he called the society of the spectacle. He observed that authentic social life was being replaced by its representation, that we were beginning to relate to images of life rather than to life itself. If he could see what has happened since, he would recognize the fulfillment of his darkest predictions. We now live in a world where many people spend more time crafting and consuming representations of life than actually living. There is a particular form of inauthenticity that seems especially prevalent in the digital age. It involves performing authenticity itself, the curated casual photograph that required dozens of attempts, the carefully crafted appearance of spontaneity, the vulnerable share that is actually a calculated bid for engagement. We have become so sophisticated in our performances that we can even perform the absence of performance. This creates a hall of mirrors in which authentic self-understanding becomes nearly impossible. When everyone is performing authenticity, genuine authenticity becomes indistinguishable from its imitation. When vulnerability is a content strategy, genuine openness becomes suspect. The very concepts we need to navigate toward truth have been corrupted by their deployment in the attention economy. The existentialists understood that we are always in danger of losing ourselves in the crowd, of defining ourselves by what they say and what everyone does. But the crowd they feared was local and limited. The crowd we face is global and omnipresent, mediated by technologies designed by some of the most sophisticated engineers on the planet, specifically optimized to capture and hold our attention. And yet, here is where we must refuse despair. The very fact that you are listening to this, that you are interested in questions of meaning and authenticity, that you have not been completely absorbed by the spectacle, this is evidence that the human capacity for genuine reflection survives. The algorithms are powerful, but they are not all powerful. The pull toward inauthenticity is strong, but it is not irresistible. Something in you is reaching for truth, and that reaching is itself a form of resistance. What is required is what we might call digital wisdom, a capacity to engage with technology without being consumed by it, to use these tools without being used by them. This involves practical steps like limiting screen time and curating social media feeds to reduce exposure to content that triggers comparison and inadequacy. But more fundamentally, it involves the cultivation of inner practices that restore contact with yourself as you actually are, not as you perform yourself to be. Meditation and contemplation, whatever form they take, are more important now than ever. Not because they are trendy, not because they promise productivity gains, but because they create space in which you can encounter yourself without mediation. When you sit in silence, when you pay attention to your breath, when you simply notice what is happening in your mind without reaching for distraction, you are practicing a form of resistance to the attention economy. You are declaring, at least for these few minutes, that your attention belongs to you. So where does all this leave us? We have traced the way that modern purpose-finding frameworks often fail us. We have explored the post-truth landscape that makes meaning-making so difficult. We have walked alongside Frankl through the concentration camps, and with Kierkegaard, Heidegger, and Sartre through the tangled questions of authentic existence. We have examined how digital environments distort our self-understanding. Now it is time to turn toward what actually works. Not a new framework or diagram, but a different orientation to the question of purpose altogether. The first insight we must take from Frankl is that meaning cannot be given. It must be discovered. No book can tell you what your life means. No guru can hand you your purpose. No algorithm can calculate your optimal trajectory. Meaning emerges from the encounter between your unique existence and the circumstances in which you find yourself. It is always personal and always specific, but this does not mean you are alone in the search. What Frankl and the existentialists offer is not content, but method. They cannot tell you what your meaning is, but they can tell you how to look for it. Remember Frankl's 3 pathways. First, creative values. Meaning comes from what you give to the world through your work and your actions. What can you create? What can you contribute? What problems can you help solve? This does not require grand achievements. The parent raising a child, the worker performing their job with care and attention, the neighbor checking in on someone who lives alone. All of these are forms of creative meaning-making. Second, experiential values. Meaning comes from what you receive from the world through your experiences and relationships. What beauty have you witnessed? What truth have you encountered? What love have you received and given? These are not productive in the economic sense. They do not show up on your resume, but they are the moments that actually make life worth living. Third, attitudinal values. Meaning comes from how you face what cannot be changed. What suffering have you encountered that you could not escape? What limitations define your existence? How have you chosen to meet them? This is perhaps the deepest form of meaning, available to everyone regardless of their circumstances. The existentialists add to this the insight that authenticity is not a destination but a continuous process. Heidegger spoke of repetition, the need to constantly renew your commitment to who you are choosing to become. You do not become authentic once and remain so forever. Each day, each moment presents the choice again. Will you live from your own center or drift along with the they? Will you face your freedom and its anxiety, or will you flee into bad faith? Sartre reminds us that we are always more than our current situation. No matter what has happened to you, no matter what limitations you face, you retain the capacity to transcend your circumstances through your choices. You are not what has been done to you. You are what you choose to do with what has been done to you. And underlying all of this is Frankl's fundamental insight that human beings are oriented toward meaning. You are not a pleasure-seeking machine whose purpose is to maximize good feelings. You are not a power-seeking machine whose purpose is to dominate and control. You are a meaning-seeking being whose deepest need is to find purpose in your existence. This search is not a problem to be fixed. It is the essential motion of human life. What does this look like in practice? It begins with attention, simply paying attention to what actually moves you, what actually engages you, what you actually care about when you are not trying to impress anyone. Not what the algorithms think you should care about. Not what your social media performance requires you to care about, what you actually care about, in the quiet moments when no one is watching. It continues with commitment. At some point, the exploration must give way to choice. You cannot remain in perpetual possibility, constantly keeping your options open. Kierkegaard's leap of faith applies not just to religion, but to any genuine commitment. To choose something is to close off other possibilities. This is frightening, but it is also the only way to create a coherent life rather than a scattered collection of unfulfilled potentials. And it deepens through acceptance of limits. You will not become everything you might have become. Your time is finite. Your capacities have boundaries. There are paths you will never walk and experiences you will never have. Authentic living requires accepting this, not with despair, but with the recognition that limitation is the condition of meaning. A story that could go anywhere and never end is not a story at all. The philosopher Simone de Beauvoir, Sartre's lifelong companion and a profound thinker in her own right, wrote about the relationship between freedom and situation. We are never absolutely free. We are always situated, embedded in particular circumstances that constrain our possibilities. But within those constraints, genuine freedom exists. The question is not whether we are absolutely free, but how we exercise the freedom we have within the situations we find ourselves in. Your situation is unique. The particular combination of abilities and limitations, opportunities and obstacles that characterizes your life has never existed before and will never exist again. This is not a problem to be solved, but a fact to be accepted, even celebrated. Your task is not to escape your situation into some ideal realm of unlimited possibility. Your task is to create meaning within the particular situation that is yours. This is why comparison to others is so corrosive to authentic living. When you compare your situation to someone else's, you are implicitly rejecting the particularity of your own existence. You are suggesting that you should be somewhere else, doing something else, being someone else. But you cannot be someone else. You can only be you. The question is whether you will be authentically you or a pale imitation of who you think you should be. There is a beautiful concept from the Stoic philosophers that connects to this understanding. They distinguished between what is up to us and what is not up to us. Our external circumstances, what happens to us, how others treat us, whether our efforts succeed or fail, these are largely not up to us. But our responses, our attitudes, how we interpret and react to what happens, these are always up to us. The focus of authentic living is on what is up to us. This does not mean passive acceptance of injustice or refusal to try to change what can be changed. It means recognizing where the locus of control actually lies. You cannot control whether your work is recognized or rewarded, but you can control whether you do your work with integrity and care. You cannot control whether others love you, but you can control whether you show up with genuine presence in your relationships. You cannot control the outcome of your efforts, but you can control whether you make the effort at all. Perhaps most importantly, authentic purpose involves self-transcendence, reaching beyond yourself towards something greater. Frankl emphasized this throughout his work. The more we focus on ourselves, the more we pursue our own happiness directly, the more it eludes us. Meaning is found not by looking inward, but by looking outward, toward tasks to be completed, truths to be discovered, people to be loved. This might seem counterintuitive in an age obsessed with self-care and self-actualization. We are constantly told to put ourselves first, to set boundaries, to protect our energy, to focus on our own needs, and there is wisdom in these recommendations. Certainly we cannot pour from an empty cup. But Frankl observed something that has been confirmed by decades of psychological research since. People who orient their lives around self-focused goals, even positive ones like personal happiness or self-improvement, tend to be less happy and less fulfilled than those who orient their lives around self-transcendent goals, contributing to something beyond themselves. This is one of the great paradoxes of human existence. Happiness cannot be pursued directly. It must ensue from dedication to something other than itself. The person who wakes up each morning asking, "What can I get today?" tends to be disappointed. The person who wakes up asking, "What can I give today?" tends to find, without seeking it, a satisfaction that the first person misses. This does not mean sacrificing your well-being for others in some masochistic display of selflessness. It means recognizing that human beings are built for connection and contribution. We flourish not in isolation, but in relationship. We find meaning not in accumulation, but in service. The architect of a great building does not derive satisfaction from thinking about themselves. They derive satisfaction from the building, from the contribution it makes, from the people who will use it for generations to come. There is another dimension to self-transcendence that Frankl understood deeply. It is the recognition that we are not alone in our struggles. Every human being who has ever lived has faced the same fundamental questions. What am I supposed to do with my life? How should I face suffering? What does my existence mean? We are connected across time and space by these shared questions. The philosophers we have discussed tonight struggled with the same darkness you struggle with. They did not have answers that made everything easy. They had insights, perspectives, ways of seeing that made the struggle more bearable and more fruitful. When you feel lost in your search for meaning, remember that you are participating in a conversation that has been going on for millennia. You are not alone in the dark. You are surrounded by the thoughts and experiences of countless others who have walked this path before you. Their wisdom does not solve your problems, but it illuminates the path you are walking. It reminds you that the questions themselves are not evidence of failure, but of humanity. There is a concept from the philosopher Gabriel Marcel that seems relevant here. Marcel distinguished between a problem and a mystery. A problem is something that stands before us, separate from us, waiting to be solved through the application of technique. Once solved, a problem goes away. But a mystery is different. A mystery is something we are inside of, something that involves us essentially, something that does not go away when we understand it better, but only deepens. The question of meaning is not a problem but a mystery. It is not something to be solved and set aside, but something to be lived into, dwelt within, participated in. When we treat it as a problem, we expect that eventually we will find the answer and be done with searching. When we recognize it as a mystery, we understand that the searching itself is a form of the answer, that the engagement with the question is not a prelude to living, but a way of living. This brings us back finally to Ikigai, but now understood in its original sense. Traditional Japanese Ikigai is not about finding the intersection of 4 circles on a diagram. It is about the quiet daily experience of finding worth in being alive. The old woman who tends her garden every morning has found her Ikigai. The craftsman who approaches his work with care and attention has found his Ikigai. The parent who rises each day for the sake of their children has found their Ikigai. It need not be grand, it need not make money. It need not change the world. It must only make getting up in the morning feel worthwhile. In this sense, Ikigai is not something you find once and possess forever. It is something you cultivate, day by day, through attention to what actually gives your life meaning. It can change as you change. It can be found in small things as well as large. It requires no framework, no diagram, no optimization. It requires only that you pay attention to your life as you are actually living it and make space for what genuinely nourishes you. There is a beautiful Japanese concept closely related to Ikigai called wabi-sabi. It refers to the appreciation of imperfection, the beauty of things that are incomplete or impermanent or irregular. A cracked teacup, a weathered wooden beam, a garden that is not perfectly manicured. Wabi-sabi suggests that we can find meaning not by achieving some ideal state, but by appreciating the particular flawed, impermanent reality that is actually before us. Your life is not a puzzle to be solved. It is a garden to be tended. Some plants will thrive and others will fail. Some seasons will bring abundance and others will bring difficulty. The point is not to achieve a final perfect state, but to show up day after day, giving attention to what is growing and what needs care. This is very different from the optimizing mindset that pervades so much contemporary discourse about purpose. The optimizing mindset assumes that there is a best answer, a maximum output, a perfect configuration to be discovered. It treats life as a problem of resource allocation. But authentic meaning is not about optimization. It is about presence, attention, and care. Consider how the optimizing mindset has colonized our thinking about relationships, careers, even spirituality. We seek to maximize happiness, to find the best partner, to optimize our morning routines. But these categories miss something essential about human existence. The best relationships are not the ones that maximize some measurable output. They are the ones where genuine presence and care flow between people. The best work is not the work that pays the most or looks most impressive on a resume. It is the work where you can bring your full attention and actually contribute something meaningful. There is a parable that Viktor Frankl liked to tell. A man comes to a wise teacher and says, "I want to be happy." The teacher replies, "First you must remove the I because the ego is the obstacle to happiness. Then you must remove the want because desire is the obstacle to contentment. What is left? Be happy." This captures something essential about the relationship between seeking and finding. The more directly we pursue happiness or meaning, the more it tends to elude us. But when we direct our attention outward, toward tasks and people and purposes that call for our engagement, happiness and meaning tend to arrive unbidden. As we draw toward the end of our journey tonight, I want to leave you with something more than philosophical ideas. I want to leave you with permission. Permission to let go of the pressure to find your one true purpose. Permission to stop treating your life like a problem to be solved and start treating it like a mystery to be lived. Permission to trust that meaning will emerge from genuine engagement with your existence, rather than from following someone else's framework. The existentialists were sometimes accused of being gloomy or pessimistic, but I find great comfort in their insights. They tell me that there is no cosmic judge waiting to declare whether I have succeeded or failed at life. They tell me that the meaning of my existence is mine to create and mine to discover. They tell me that even in the darkest circumstances, I retain the freedom to choose my response. They tell me that authentic living is available to anyone willing to face its demands. What the existentialists offer is not escape from difficulty, but a way of being with difficulty that does not destroy us. They do not promise that life will make sense in some final, complete way. They promise that we can make sense, that meaning-making is a human capacity that cannot be taken from us, that even in the face of absurdity and suffering and uncertainty, we can forge a life worth living. There is something almost rebellious about this stance. The universe does not care whether you find meaning. Society may or may not reward your efforts to live authentically. The algorithms certainly do not have your flourishing as their goal. And yet, despite all this, you can choose to live a life of purpose and significance. This is not naive optimism. It is courageous affirmation in the face of everything that works against it. The writer Albert Camus, who was closely associated with existentialism though he rejected the label, wrote extensively about absurdity. He suggested that we must imagine Sisyphus happy. Sisyphus, in Greek mythology, was condemned by the gods to roll a boulder up a hill for eternity, only to have it roll back down each time he reached the summit. It is a perfect image of meaningless suffering, of effort without lasting result. But Camus saw something else in this myth. In the moment when Sisyphus watches his boulder roll back down the hill, in that moment of pause before he descends to begin again, there is a peculiar kind of freedom. He knows his fate. He has accepted it. And in that acceptance, in that refusal to hope for escape or to despair at his condition, he becomes master of his fate. The boulder is his burden, but it is also his. No one can take from him the way he carries it. This is not resignation. It is something closer to defiance. The gods meant to punish Sisyphus with meaninglessness. But in his attitude toward his punishment, in his choice to engage fully with his task despite its futility, he creates a meaning they never intended. His response transcends their intention. We are all, in a sense, pushing boulders up hills. Our projects will be forgotten. Our achievements will fade. Our bodies will return to dust. There is no permanent monument to be built, no lasting legacy that will endure forever. And yet we continue to push. We continue to try. We continue to invest ourselves in purposes and relationships and creations that we know will not last. Why? Because the alternative is to stop living while still technically alive. Because meaning is not something we extract from the universe, but something we bring to it. Because the very act of striving, of caring, of trying despite knowing that nothing lasts forever, this is what it means to be human. And Frankl, who had more reason than almost anyone to despair, who lost everyone he loved and witnessed the very depths of human cruelty, Frankl insisted to the end of his life that meaning can be found in any situation. Not because bad things are secretly good, not because suffering is a blessing in disguise, but because human beings have a capacity for meaning-making that transcends their circumstances. Because even in the concentration camp, there were moments of beauty, acts of kindness, choices that affirmed human dignity in the face of systematic dehumanization. If meaning could be found there, it can be found anywhere. If authentic existence was possible under those conditions, it is possible under yours. So as you drift towards sleep tonight, as your thoughts begin to soften and your breathing deepens, let go of the burden of having to figure everything out. Your purpose is not a riddle waiting to be solved. It is a life waiting to be lived. It will reveal itself not through analysis but through engagement, not through frameworks but through commitment, not through optimization but through love. The search for meaning is not a problem you need to solve tonight. It is the movement of your entire existence, and it will continue as long as you live. Trust that movement. Trust that the very fact that you are asking these questions, that you care about finding meaning, that you refuse to settle for mere distraction and consumption. Trust that this is already evidence of your orientation toward authentic existence. You are not lost. You are searching. And searching is what human beings do. It is what we are for. The very capacity to feel lost is evidence that you know, somewhere deep inside, that there is something to be found. Animals do not feel existentially lost because they do not ask questions about meaning. Rocks do not wonder whether they are fulfilling their purpose. Only beings capable of genuine reflection, beings who can imagine alternatives to their current existence, beings who can project themselves into possible futures. Only such beings can experience the disorientation of not knowing where they belong or what they are supposed to do. In other words, your confusion is not a bug in the system. It is a feature of your humanity. It is the inevitable companion of freedom and consciousness. Those who never feel lost are either very lucky or they are not paying attention. For the rest of us, getting lost is part of the journey. But here is what the philosophers we have walked with tonight want you to understand. Getting lost is not the same as being without direction. You may not know your final destination, but you can still take the next step. You may not have a complete map, but you can still choose which fork in the road to take. You may not understand the ultimate meaning of your existence, but you can still decide how to respond to this particular day, this particular challenge, this particular opportunity that stands before you right now. Meaning is not something you figure out once and then possess forever. It is something you participate in, moment by moment, choice by choice. It is not a treasure buried somewhere waiting to be dug up. It is more like a garden that must be tended, a relationship that must be nurtured, a fire that must be continuously fed. Tomorrow you will wake, and the questions will still be there. But perhaps now they will feel less like a burden and more like an invitation. An invitation to pay attention to what actually moves you. An invitation to commit to what matters, even knowing you cannot justify that commitment with certainty. An invitation to face your freedom and its accompanying anxiety rather than fleeing into distraction. The philosophers we have walked alongside tonight are not here to give you answers. They are here to remind you that the questions themselves are precious. That grappling with meaning is not a problem but a privilege. That being the kind of creature who wonders about purpose is already a form of purpose. Rest now. Let these ideas settle into whatever form is useful to you. And know that the search you are on, the longing you feel, the questions that keep you awake, these are not signs that something is wrong with you. They are signs that you are exactly what a human being is supposed to be. There is one final thought I want to leave with you as sleep approaches. The existentialists and Frankl alike understood something important about the relationship between meaning and time. We live forward but understand backward. In the moment of choice, in the present instant, we cannot fully grasp the significance of what we are doing. It is only later, looking back, that patterns emerge and purposes become clear. This means that you may not be able to see your meaning clearly right now. You may feel like you are stumbling in the dark, making choices without understanding where they lead. But this does not mean your life lacks meaning. It means that the meaning has not yet fully revealed itself. You are in the middle of your story, and stories only make complete sense at the end. This should bring comfort rather than frustration. You do not need to figure everything out right now. You do not need to have certainty about where you are going. You only need to take the next faithful step to engage with what is before you with attention and care, to remain open to the meanings that may emerge from your honest engagement with existence. The philosophers have done their work. They have illuminated the landscape, shown you where the pitfalls lie, offered their hard-won wisdom about how to navigate the territory. But ultimately, you must walk the path yourself. No one can live your life for you. No one can make your choices or face your particular challenges. This is not a burden, but a gift. It means your life is genuinely yours. If this exploration has brought you some measure of peace or insight, I would be grateful if you would share it with others who might benefit. Consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel, and leaving a comment about what resonated with you. Every engagement helps these philosophical conversations reach other souls searching for meaning in the stillness of the night. Until we meet again, may you find what you are looking for. And if you do not find it tonight, may you find the courage to keep looking tomorrow. Good night, dear friends. The search continues.